Okay, so let's talk about the Castle of Otranto itself. It is a fantastic, weird, crazy, eccentric story. Hopefully you've all read it by now. I would strongly recommend reading it first before following this lecture. I think it'll make a bit more sense that way around. But to recount, essentially we're looking at the story of Manfred. Manfred is kind of the central figure in this story. He is the Prince of Otranto. He rules this little area, and he's trying to kind of continue his family rule by marrying his son Conrad to the Princess Isabella, who we will later find out is actually the heir of the true heirs of Otranto. She is part of the family who truly rightfully own Otranto, but we shall get on to that. Manfred is trying to marry Conrad and Isabella. Conrad, we're told, is very weak, very sickly. They're hurrying the wedding because it looks like Conrad might die. And this, I think, is interesting because then we can think of, people often look at Conrad as being a kind of analogy for Walpole himself, the child of this incredibly confident, powerful ruler, and being a disappointment, being too sickly, too weak, too effeminate, unable to successfully marry and continue the family line. Now, that's a pretty harsh reading if we take that, because Conrad gets killed in the first page, the first couple of pages. Maybe it takes 2 days, 2 pages. I think it's one. Depends on how big your print is. Conrad is crushed to death on his wedding day by a giant mysterious helmet that just appears out of nowhere. What the heck? So the sort of the body of the story is Manfred trying to continue this wedding, trying to continue this union, because when Conrad is dead, all he has is a daughter. He doesn't have a male heir to continue the line, so he decides to marry Isabella himself. That means he has to divorce Hippolyta, his wife. All mayhem ensues. There are 2 young princesses. They are fleeing. This peculiar young man shows up, Theodore, a peasant in disguise. He is obviously going to turn out to be the one true heir. And so mostly it's kind of Manfred's story, but also Manfred is not a particularly likable character. He's a bit of a tyrannical villain. And we soon become, I think as the story goes on, we become quite attached to the princesses and trying to follow their lines as they both fall in love with young Theodore, and we try and work out who is going to end up with control of Otranto, and are the baddies going to win? Don't worry, they're not. So let's just talk about our publication history a little bit. So I touched on this last time. The Castle of Otranto was initially published as a kind of found document. It didn't have Walpole's name on it at all. So here you should be able to see on your screen there the initial attribution. The Castle of Otranto, a story, translated by William Marshall, Gent, from the original Italian of Onufio Moralto, canon of the Church of St. Nicholas at Otranto. Okay, bunch of stuff going on there. Thing number 1, translated by William Marshall. So William Marshall is the Englishman who is, I guess in a way, the kind of the pseudonym behind which Walpole is hiding. Sorry, absolutely blinding here, but you don't really need to see my face, I suppose. So William Marshall is the Englishman who has translated this, apparently. It is from the original Italian of Onufio Moralto, which we are told further through that preface, and do read that preface to spend some time with it, break it down, analyze it a little bit, because it's going to be incredibly useful, particularly if you're writing on Otranto for your first essay. But it kind of, the preface says that this manuscript, this Italian manuscript by Onufio Otranto was found in an English, in the kind of the, I think, is it in the attic? I mean, I've got some note to the attic. Sorry, it's in the library, recently rediscovered in the library of an ancient Catholic family in the north of England. And the kind of this brilliant little introduction kind of says, okay, they found this ancient Italian manuscript. There is little bits of speculation on who these people are and who, where they got the manuscript, how it came to be in their possession. It also kind of implies that Maralto is just relating something that's a bit of a folk story. It's not a direct, oh, this distinctly happens. But he kind of specifically says, yes, he was at Otranto. This is, Otranto is a real place. It's in Italy. It was long, long ago. Something like this happened. These are the stories that have been told. Now, that was kind of how it was initially set up, as a kind of historical curiosity, but people loved it. It's incredibly entertaining. It's a real good romance. It's a good, I use romance in the kind of term of adventurous story rather than what we would today consider romantic. Very difficult word, romance and romantic. There's so many different meanings of it when you get into it. Oh, gone too far. Here we go. So let's look at the second preface. And again, really interesting. Let's put them side by side and see what happens. In the second preface, Walpole steps forward as the author. He calls the novel a Gothic story, which is the first time that we really get this kind of claiming of I've made this thing and it's Gothic. And we can look in previously in Walpole's letters, he talks about how much he likes to read Gothic adventures, which is that kind of slightly self-mocking, oh yes, these stories are so old-fashioned, they're so kind of ridiculous, they're Gothic. But he put that word quite boldly on this and kind of reclaimed it. So here is his introduction. The favorable manner in which this little piece has been received by the public calls upon the author to explain the grounds on which he composed it. It was attempted to be a blend of two kinds of romance, the ancient and the modern. In the former, all was imagination and improbability. In the latter, nature is always intended to be, and sometimes has been, copied with success. Invention has not been wanting, but the great resources of fantasy have been dammed up by strict adherence to common life. So Walpole is actually articulating a sort of a proposal for a new genre here. So he's kind of saying, okay, in the past, these kind of Gothic stories, these medieval tales, all is imagination and probability. People don't act normally. People don't respond to things. It's just, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. We don't really get any kind of internal psychology of our characters. In the modern, so modern for Walpole, modern mode of romance, and again, romance is just a sort of meaning stories, excuse me, in this sort of modern romance, what we tend to get is an absolute adherence to factuality. So he's sort of saying the great resources of fancy have been dammed up. You can't tell stories about things that aren't true, dragons and majesty. People are trying so hard to tell real life as accurately as possible. And what Walpole claims is that he has taken the two and joined them. And he talks quite proudly about the subtlety of character, which might seem slightly laughable to us because they're quite caricature-y, but considering the kind of story it is, nobody told the kind of story that this is of magic and mystery with such attention to how characters might be thinking and feeling before. Lots of kind of novels were written that did show, if those of you doing the 18th century London module, this ties in very nicely. You'll be kind of familiar with the Daniel Defoe stuff. Yeah, people were starting to really write novels that showed people's thoughts and feelings. And so Walpole's just saying, yeah, let's do that, but let's also have a huge range of fantasy while we're here as well. Okay, let's look at some of our kind of Gothic tropes. What is making it Gothic? Okay, it is set far away and long ago. And this criteria of far away and long ago, we will see run through most of the texts that we're looking at. I want to introduce you to the Gothic tropes, but I also want you to be wary of the Gothic tropes. So if you are writing about Gothic tropes at any point, it's not enough to just point to them. You need to be really breaking down why we have these Gothic tropes. So what is the benefit of having things long ago and far away? It gives you a kind of liberty. It's not just today. It's not sticking to real life. It's kind of saying, okay, I mean, it's the classic once upon a time. You know, when we say once upon a time, we go, okay, we're not really dragging this into the realms of where anything can be questioned. You know, if you're going to say, okay, this is a story about London. If I'm to sit down and write something, it's London in 2020. Okay, everyone is going to be questioning on you that that's not true. You put that there. That doesn't exist. What? There's a sense that by setting things long ago and far away, people could be a bit more fanciful. They could probably criticize things a little bit. They could show people being a bit superstitious. And go, well, that's what people were like long ago and far away. So it is set in Italy. It is set in the Middle Ages. Great. The Middle Ages specifically is when so much of this kind of Gothic architecture is actually happening in the first time around. So this is very directly harking back to what they would consider Gothic times. Okay, we have an interior setting, is an old building, dark prison, like lots of paintings and armors, etc. Fantastic. Yeah, so many of these texts we're going to see castles and prisons and dungeons. And okay, what is the purpose of this trope? Well, for one, we have the literal darkness, so the kind of the unknown, bringing that back to our ideas of enlightenment and darkness. We were talking about Foucault last week. The literally not knowing what is happening, and indeed the being imprisoned is a very kind of fearful thing. However, we can also see a lot of times this works as a very useful metaphor for kind of the psychology of what's on the outside and what's going on inside the person. So, you know, a castle is something that looks authoritative and calm and certain. It is a statement of power, but look at everything that's happening within. So someone like Manfred, he's the ruler. Everybody should be looking at him saying, yeah, what a great guy. He is ruling fairly. He's in power as he should be. The more we look into him, the more we get to see inside the castle. We see how much he is hiding. We see that he is not really the rightful heir. And we see all of his kind of personal insecurities. So by the end, he is incredibly sorry for how he has behaved, because he's been absolutely awful as a human being. What else do we have in here? Descriptive techniques to invoke suspense and terror. Yeah, absolutely. Dark interiors, chases through twisting passageways. The section of this novel which deals with Isabella in the caverns, the subterraneous caverns, subterraneous passageways. Sorry, she's escaping from the castle of Otranto and trying to find her way to the nearby chapel. This is incredibly famous. This is a really striking work of literature because that scene has been redone, it has been parodied, it has been everythinged. This is where it comes from, that scene. She's all alone in the dark, she's got the candle, the wind flickers and the candle goes out. Who is there? There's a voice. She's absolutely lost, she's absolutely in darkness. Anything could happen. It's really cool. Okay, the tyrannical male ruler. We're going to look a lot at gender as we go forward. Very often there is a tyrannical force in Gothic. Very often there is a tyrannical male ruler which is actively critiquing the male authority, the roles of male authority. If the rulers, the kings, all of these things are kind of being drawn into question, because let's not forget, this not only is the age of enlightenment, but we are approaching the age of revolution. Walpole is entirely within sight of the French Revolution, the American Revolution. People are starting to say, okay, why is that dude in power? Why is there one king right at the top and then everybody else flows down? Maybe that's not right. And so Gothic is inherently, I feel Gothic is inherently critical of that male rulership, or at least wary of the abuses of that kind of patriarchal power. That is so often contrasted with pure and angelic females, sometimes strong and gutsy. I think we have sort of two slightly different modes of heroine there. Isabella, Matilda, and Hippolyta. I'm going to talk about them in just a second. But if you have a wicked male ruler, you probably have an absolutely faultless young woman who he is persecuting. So I think Matilda is our like absolute, oh, she's just so dang good. I mean, Isabella's pretty dang good as well, but she's a little bit more feisty. Matilda will just be like, oh, well, you know, if I have to die, I have to die. Come on, Matilda. Punch someone. Even when she's actually dying, even when she's actually been stabbed by her stupid father, she's just like, don't be sad, Teddy. Like, yes, be sad, you awful person. Look what you've done. Isabella's got a bit more fire to her, which is fun, and is going to kind of set up a couple of the other heroines. I mean, I think looking at gender in Gothic is fascinating, particularly looking at Gothic as a mode for breaking gender norms, particularly what women are allowed to do, is really, really fun. The final point here is repressed family secrets revealed and have to be worked through. So this, I think, it's not something we see in all Gothic fictions, but it is a trope that runs through an awful lot of them. Everything that happens in this book basically happens because of the family secrets. And again, we can look at that as a social political commentary on systems of power. Saying, okay, where do the kings, the rulers, the prime ministers, where do they all get their power from? If there is something corrupt or unpleasant in there, it needs to be worked through before harmony can be reached. Or it can just be talked about on a very personal level, on a family level, or indeed in an internal psychology of just one person that actually we all have secrets and messed up stuff going on there, and we kind of need to work through all of them before we can kind of go through. In this, it's the illegitimacy of Manfred's reign. It's the fact that Manfred is not the rightful ruler of Otranto that dominates this whole book. Everything happens because he is falsely there. So everything that happens, let's talk about why everything that happens. We're going to be discussing the supernatural. What is the supernatural and why does it happen? There is so much supernatural here. So right at the beginning, we are told that there is a curse. Let me hang on, I have the curse right here. La la la. My notes. Okay, the castle and lordship of Otranto should pass from the present family whenever the real owner should be grown too large to inhabit it. So we are told there is a hint there that people already know that Manfred is not the real ruler. We're never quite told where this curse has come from. What we kind of finally told is that it's Saint Nicholas, who is the saint of the chapel, is kind of watching over everyone and basically putting things right that have not been done in the right way. I mean, I would question his methods. I would question who put him in charge, because he's pretty rough. The moral at the end of this story is one of essentially a kind of divine right of kings, that there is a just order of who should be in power, and that the sins of the fathers will be visited on their children to the third and fourth generation. So think of everybody who dies. Conrad dies, Matilda dies. Neither of them did anything wrong. Manfred's grandfather did something wrong. He poisoned the rightful heir so that he could claim the throne. We have here actually, I have your little family tree, which I think is possibly quite quite useful. Yeah, so here is Manfred marries Hippolyta, and they have their children, Matilda and Conrad. But if you look up, we don't know anything about Manfred's parents, but we know that his grandfather is Ricardo, who poisons Alfonso the Good, who not only is Alfonso the rightful king, he's also Alfonso the Good, because he's a good chap. And from that, we have Alfonso the Good we don't quite know how he's related to Frederick, but he's the nearest known relative. So that is Isabella's line, and this is why Manfred knows this. Manfred is trying to marry Isabella to Conrad to thus unite the two strains, the two potential claims to the throne. Let's just, we'll go back to where we were. Supernatural occurrence. So we have the curse. The appearance of the giant armor. The armor looks a lot like the statue of Alfonso. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Where are we? There we are. The armor looks a lot like that of the statue of Alfonso, but it is not. It's not the statue that's in Otranto, because it's way too big. Where does it come from? I mean, it is really quite comical, because it appears, this isn't phantoms and ghosts, it appears, it physically crushes a guy, and then it's just left lying around, which I think is fantastic. So what do we have? We have the helmet that crushes Conrad. We have the feet that are seen by the servants Diego and Jacques. They don't stick around. They seem to just disappear. I don't know where they go. The sword found by Frederick, which is brought in, and the armored hand that Bianca sees on the stairs. And this is going to incredibly annoy me, because I'm noticing as I'm looking at the slides here that I've opened brackets and not closed them. Oh, I'll get over it, but I don't like it. I do that so much and it's really distressing. Okay, so we have the curse, we have the appearance of the giant armor, the painting, the painted portrait kind of comes to life and stares rather terrifyingly. Frederick's dream. So Frederick has a dream which leads him to the hermit, and then the hermit tells him that he had a vision of St. Nicholas. So St. Nicholas is operating in very peculiar ways here, going, I'm going to give you the dream, I'm going to give you this, I'm going to give you, okay, fine. And then the hermit skeleton / ghost appears to Frederick, which is pretty impressive. We have thunder and minor earthquakes, dramatic moments, and then we have Alfonso's final appearance. I haven't mentioned the skeleton priest in here, which is a shame. We do have a skeleton priest as well. So there's absolutely loads going on here. Every potential imaginable Gothic trope is thrown in. Let's actually look at the full description of what happened, why it all happened. And I think it would be really interesting to have a little discussion when we meet about what on earth we think of this and if it should be so punished. So this is Manfred. Right at the end, he finally confesses, gets everything off his chest. Alfonso, you know, died in the Holy Land. You would interrupt me. You would say he came not fairly to his end. It is most true. Why else this bitter cup which Manfred must drink to the dregs? Ricardo, my grandfather, was his chamberlain. Alfonso died by poison. A fictitious will declared Ricardo his heir. So Manfred's grandfather killed Alfonso, the rightful heir, and forged a will to say that he was in charge. His crimes pursued him. So this is Ricardo's crimes pursued him. Yet he lost no Conrad, no Matilda. I pay the price of usurpation for all. And I think that is a really sort of touching moment, that Manfred has been handed these wrongs. He has been handed these sins. He has fought to conceal them. He has paid a great price. He's lost both of his children. Ricardo seemed to kind of get on okay. And so there's a bittersweetness in that we find that even Manfred, who it's easy to just dismiss as a baddie, actually is put in a really difficult position. He is born into a really difficult position. It doesn't excuse him. He is genuinely awful throughout the book. I pay the price of usurpation for all. A storm overtook him. Haunted by his guilt, he vowed to St. Nicholas to found a church and 2 convents if he lived to reach Otranto. The sacrifice was accepted. The saint appeared to him in a dream and promised that Ricardo's posterity should reign in Otranto until the rightful owner should be grown too large to inhabit the castle, as long as issue male from Ricardo's loins should remain to enjoy it. Alas, alas, nor male nor female, except myself, remains of all his wretched race. So interestingly here, this is kind of even Saint Nicholas, even the pure forces of good are kind of accepting bribes here. It's a very morally convoluted situation. They say, okay, if you create this church, then we'll let you have this line for a while until somehow the heir will return. We have a lot of very comic misunderstanding, and I think this is quite fun, something that adds a great deal of suspense and also comedy to the book as we go through. Many people don't realize who they are. So there's who they're talking to, who they're actually, so some people are kind of deliberately in disguise. Some people are inadvertently in disguise, so nobody knows that Theodore is actually the rightful heir. Nobody knows that Theodore is the son of Friar Jerome. There's a point where Theodore and Frederick fight each other. They have a really good long battle, but they're both protecting Isabella. Like, that's their single purpose of this, is no, we must protect her. But you idiots, you have the same goal. Stop fighting. But they don't. You got to have a good fight. Someone's got to get injured, Theodore, bless him, confuses Isabella for Matilda and Matilda for Hippolyta. There's a lot of confusing the various women in this story. And then Manfred, in a fit of rage, stabs his own daughter Matilda, thinking it is Isabella, who should have been his daughter-in-law, but he is trying to make his wife, which is a nice little Freudian slip there, Freudian slip of the dagger, to confuse your daughter with the woman you're trying to marry. It's not ideal. So all of these kind of textual misunderstandings, I think there are a few lovely points in this story, and something we will see later in other novels as well, in which some people seem to have half an eye on what kind of story it is. Some people, particularly the superstitious or more working class people, lower kind of cultural backgrounds, are better attuned to what is happening than the aristocracy. So this is Matilda and Bianca talking. So Matilda the princess and Bianca, her kind of, I can't quite find out what Bianca is, but she's some servant within the castle. I observed, did you not, Bianca? His words were tinctured with an uncommon infusion of piety. It was no ruffian speech. His phrases were becoming of a man of gentle birth. I told you, madam, said Bianca, that I was sure he was some prince in disguise. And indeed she did. So some of the things that turn out to be, so the knight who visits very mysteriously, bringing this giant sword with him and then refusing to speak at dinner, turns out to be Frederick, Isabella's father. Theodore the peasant turns out to be nobility, actually the son of Friar Jerome, and also Theodore turns out to be the Prince of Otranto. Father Jerome turns out to be the Count of Falconara. Who'd have thought? So there's an awful lot of revelations in this. There's a lot of, man, that's convenient, particularly with Theodore. The fact that Theodore is the one that Manfred gets angry at the beginning and puts in prison is absolutely preposterous. But we're all kind of suspending disbelief. We have a lot of fun with this story. Okay. Two last things before we round up this video. So the two ways of interpreting Otranto, and we will talk about these much more in the seminar. Psychoanalytically, the text represents some of the intergenerational conflicts experienced by Horace Walpole and basically all families. So maybe you haven't killed anyone in your family to try and get to a higher place. Maybe you didn't try and marry your son's fiance, whatever. But there is a kind of, we can easily see this as being representative of the pains, the difficulties, the sins that happen in families and where people betray people and how that is covered up and passed on. Or we can look at it historically. The text represents anxieties about the use and abuse of power in the mid-18th century. To go very specifically into psychoanalytically, we could see Robert Walpole as Manfred, if we wanted to draw these very direct parallels, a bad father, and Horace Walpole as Conrad, the weak son. So there is a model of bad fathers and bad sons, which is then countered by Jerome as a good father and Theodore as the stronger son. And so there, we kind of see Manfred and Conrad as these are the failures of both fathers and sons. But is there another version of them? Is there, Conrad is Theodore is just a peasant at the beginning, but he shows his real true worth, and he is loved by Jerome. And so there is a possible notion of an improved way of seeing family, and the good family, the good version, inherits. The corrupted version is washed away. So let's talk a little tiny bit. We'll have to look at the children, at the women of this story. But this is something I want you guys to think about when we meet again, kind of continuing this notion of families. Look at the three women in the novel. So the three main characters. So Hippolyta, the Manfred's wife, absolutely subservient. So I have a quote here. I've put some quotation marks in just to make it a bit clearer. "My lovely children," said the touched Hippolyta, "your tenderness overpowers me, but I must not give way to it. It is not ours to make election for ourselves. Heavens, our fathers and our husbands must decide for us." Wow. Heavens, fathers, husbands. Women, what do they know? We just sit here and do what we're told. Okay, so Hippolyta is absolutely expressing the patriarchal view, and she is, she even accepts when Manfred says he has to divorce her so he can marry Isabella. Like, she's a little bit upset about it, but she's like, oh, I'm sure he knows what he's doing. He knows best. Isabella and Matilda learn to rebel. They are pushing against, yes, Manfred, who is cruel, and is, just trying to marry everyone off, and we're trying to marry Isabella, and then trying to marry Matilda off to someone she doesn't love. But also they have to kind of rebel against Hippolyta as well. So how much can Gothic and Otranto be seen as a rebellion of children against their parents? That is something I want us to have a discussion of when we see. Isabella seems to be the typical heroine. She is the one who goes kind of running away. She's the one with a bit of the spark. But it's Matilda who's initially set up as being way too pure, way too good. Matilda doesn't really look out for herself. She is the one who Theodore falls in love with, which we kind of know by basic maths and basic understanding of how stories go. There are two girls, there is one boy. This cannot happen. And what happens is kind of astonishing. Matilda gets killed by her father, who mistakes her for Isabella. And in a real, oh, it should have been me, it should have been her. Isabella is left, and Isabella marries Theodore right at the end. And they kind of go, well, we can talk about Matilda together. I think that's got to be the shittest marriage ever. Like, how awful. She's in love with Theodore. She thinks he's a dream. She's, yeah, right there. And he's in love with someone else, but she dies. And then he's like, well, I'll marry you as a kind of second best option. And that, I think, is particularly interesting when we consider the possible subtext of Walpole's homosexuality, kind of that he can't really end this with a positive heterosexual marriage. Like, even what we're left with is really bittersweet. It is like, okay, we can be friends and not think about how sad we are that we don't actually have the people that we love. So that is all I'm going to say for just now. I hope you've enjoyed the book very much. Come to the seminar prepared with questions and discussions, and we'll go back over some major points. And I will make another little video for you guys about Strawberry Hill itself. Do my little